Preparing for a operations at HSBC interview? You've reached Candy Mentor, and this video is for you. We'll walk through 20 key questions you're likely to face. For each question, you'll see a sample answer followed by the key points to cover. Subscribe, like, and share, and drop a topic request in the comments. Question 1. What do you understand by operations in a global bank like HSBC? Banking operations is the engine that makes client activity settle accurately, safely, and on time. In a global bank like HSBC, that means processing payments, onboarding clients, maintaining static data, reconciling breaks, supporting trade lifecycle events, and meeting regulatory controls. I see the role as balancing speed with risk discipline. Serve the customer efficiently, but never bypass controls, documentation, sanction screening, or escalation requirements for convenience. While answering, focus on operations as the execution backbone of banking, covering accuracy, controls, client service, regulatory obligations, reconciliations, payments, onboarding, and escalation discipline in a global environment. Question 2. Why do you want to work in operations at HSBC? I am attracted to HSBC because its operations teams sit at the center of global banking flows, especially payments, trade, market support, and client servicing. That scale means the work is process-driven, but never routine, because timing, jurisdictions, and regulatory requirements all matter. I want a role where accuracy, problem-solving, and teamwork directly affect customers. HSBC also appeals to me because it combines operational discipline with ongoing automation and transformation. Make sure to cover HSBC's global scale, exposure to cross-border banking processes, process discipline, risk culture, technology transformation, and your interest in supporting customers through strong operational execution. Question 3. How would you handle a high-volume process with strict same-day cutoff times? I would first segment the queue by cutoff time, risk, client impact, and dependency on other teams. Straight-through items should move quickly, while exceptions need early triage so they do not block the whole process. I would track progress against the deadline, communicate risks early, and escalate aged or high-value items. Even under pressure, I would keep maker-checker controls intact, because a fast but incorrect transaction creates more downstream damage. In your answer, talk about prioritization, queue management, cutoff awareness, maker-checker controls, escalation, exception handling, communication with stakeholders, and avoiding shortcuts even under time pressure. Question 4. Tell me about a time you identified a process improvement. In a previous process, I noticed repeated delays came from incomplete request details rather than actual processing time. I reviewed the error log, grouped the common causes, and suggested a standardized intake checklist. After discussing it with the team, we added mandatory fields and clear ownership for missing information. The result was fewer reworks and faster turnaround. I also monitored the same metrics afterward to confirm the improvement was not just temporary. Be sure to mention the original problem, data used to diagnose it, the improvement proposed, stakeholder buy-in, control considerations, measurable impact, and how you ensured the change was sustainable. Question 5. What controls would you expect in an operations process? A strong operations process needs controls before, during, and after processing. Before processing, I would expect authorization checks, valid documentation, and system access restrictions. During processing, maker-checker review, segregation of duties, and tolerance checks reduce error risk. After processing, reconciliations, exception reports, and audit trails help detect breaks quickly. The key is that controls should be proportionate to risk and embedded into daily workflow, not treated as an afterthought. While answering, focus on preventive, detective, and corrective controls such as maker-checker review, reconciliations, access controls, exception reports, audit trails, approvals, segregation of duties, and escalation procedures. Question 6. How would you investigate a reconciliation break? I would start by confirming whether the break is timing-related or a true mismatch. Then I would compare transaction references, value date, amount, currency, counterparty, fees, and status across the source systems. If it relates to static data or a booking error, I would identify the owner and request correction with evidence. I would document the investigation clearly, escalate material or aged breaks, and ensure the final resolution is reflected in the reconciliation record. Make sure to cover comparing source systems, identifying timing versus genuine breaks, checking reference data, transaction details, fees, FX, cancellations, escalation, documentation, and timely resolution. Question 7. How do you ensure accuracy when processing repetitive operational tasks? Repetitive work becomes risky when people go on autopilot, so I rely on structure. I use checklists, confirm critical fields, and understand why each step matters instead of just following screens mechanically. For high-risk items, I slow down and validate source documents against system inputs. I also review error trends because recurring mistakes usually point to a weak step in the process. Consistency, not speed alone, is what protects quality. In your answer, talk about checklists, attention to detail, understanding process purpose, avoiding autopilot, using system validations, peer review, break tracking, and learning from previous errors. Question 8. What would you do if you discovered an operational error after processing a transaction? I would not try to hide it or quietly fix it without approval. First, I would assess what happened, which transaction is affected, and whether there is client, financial, regulatory, or settlement impact. Then I would escalate to the appropriate manager with facts and evidence. After the correction is approved, I would document the incident and help identify the root cause. The priority is to contain the issue quickly and prevent recurrence. Be sure to mention transparency, immediate escalation, assessing client and financial impact, stopping further errors, correction steps, root cause analysis, documentation, and avoiding concealment or informal fixes. Question 9. How would you deal with a difficult internal stakeholder who is pressuring you to bypass a control? I would stay professional and explain that the control exists to protect the bank, the customer, and the employee processing the item. I would try to help by offering a compliant alternative, such as prioritizing the review or identifying missing documentation quickly. But I would not bypass a required step because of pressure. If the stakeholder continued to push, I would document the situation and escalate through the proper channel. While answering, focus on professionalism, explaining the control purpose, offering compliant alternatives, documenting the request, escalating when necessary, and aligning with HSBC's risk and conduct culture. Question 10. What does good customer service mean in an operations role? In operations, customer service is not only about being polite, it is about delivering accurate outcomes reliably. The customer may be external, or it may be a front office, compliance, or finance team, depending on the process. I would provide clear updates, set realistic timelines, and take ownership until the issue is closed. Good service also means preventing repeat issues by fixing the underlying process, not just answering the same query faster. Make sure to cover internal and external customers, accuracy, timely updates, ownership, clear communication, expectation management, confidentiality, and resolving root causes rather than only responding to queries. Question 11. How do sanctions screening and AML checks affect banking operations? Sanctions and AML checks are critical because banks can face serious regulatory, financial, and reputational consequences if prohibited activity is processed. In operations, these checks affect onboarding, payments, trade transactions, and customer maintenance. Some alerts may be false positives, but they still need proper review, evidence, and escalation when required. I would never treat screening as a box-ticking step. It is part of protecting the financial system and the bank's license to operate. In your answer, talk about financial crime risk, payment and onboarding workflows, screening alerts, false positives, escalation to compliance, documentation, regulatory consequences, and balancing speed with control. Question 12. Explain the maker-checker concept and why it matters. Maker-checker means one person prepares or inputs a transaction, and another independently reviews and approves it. It matters because operational mistakes can be costly, especially in payments, static data, settlements, and client onboarding. The checker should not simply rubber stamp the work. They should validate key fields, documentation, limits, and approvals, This creates accountability, reduces fraud risk, and leaves an audit trail showing that a controlled review took place. Be sure to mention segregation of duties, independent review, reducing errors and fraud, high-risk data or payments, audit evidence, accountability, and why checker review must be meaningful. Question 13. How would you manage competing priorities from multiple teams? I would prioritize based on risk, client impact, cutoff times, regulatory sensitivity, and agreed SLAs, not simply who asks the loudest. If everything appears urgent, I would clarify deadlines and align with my manager on the order of execution. I would also communicate transparently with stakeholders, especially if a request will be delayed. Good prioritization is about making trade-offs visible and controlled, rather than allowing work to pile up silently. While answering, focus on assessing urgency, client impact, risk, deadlines, SLAs, regulatory sensitivity, transparent communication, manager alignment, and keeping stakeholders updated, rather than silently delaying work. Question 14. What key performance indicators would you track in an operations team? I would track both speed and quality metrics. Turnaround time, SLA adherence, volumes processed, and backlog show whether the team is meeting demand. Error rate, first 10 right percentage, aged breaks, control breaches, and rework show whether the process is stable. I would also monitor query themes and root causes because they reveal where clients or internal teams are experiencing friction. The best KPIs help management act, not just report activity. Make sure to cover turnaround time, SLA adherence, error rate, break aging, volume productivity, backlog, first time right percentage, control breaches, customer queries, and root cause themes. Question 15. How would you respond if a system outage affected a critical operations process? During a system outage, I would first follow the business continuity and incident management procedure, not improvise. I would confirm the impact, escalate to technology and management, and identify whether approved manual workarounds exist. Critical transactions would be prioritized based on cutoffs, client impact, and risk. I would keep an audit trail of manual actions and communicate status clearly. After restoration, I would support reconciliations and post-incident review to ensure nothing was missed. In your answer, talk about business continuity plans, incident escalation, manual workarounds, risk approval, communication, prioritizing critical transactions, audit trail, post-incident review, and operational resilience. Question 16. What is the difference between a process risk and a control weakness? A process risk is what could go wrong. A control weakness is why the current safeguards may not stop it. For example, in payment processing, the risk is sending funds to the wrong beneficiary. A control weakness could be no independent verification of changed beneficiary details. I would assess both impact and likelihood, then strengthen the control through maker-checker review, system validation, approval thresholds, or exception reporting, depending on the root cause. Be sure to explain that process risk is the potential for failure or loss, while control weakness is a gap in mitigation. Using an operations example and remediation thinking can help illustrate this clearly. Question 17. How do you approach learning a new operations process quickly? I start by understanding the purpose of the process, who sends the input, what output is expected, and what risk the process controls. Then I map the main steps, systems, SLAs, approvals, and exception paths. I like shadowing experienced colleagues while taking notes on common errors and escalation triggers. Once I process independently, I use a checklist until I build confidence. Learning quickly means understanding the logic, not memorizing clicks. While answering, focus on understanding process purpose, inputs and outputs, systems, controls, SLAs, stakeholders, common exceptions, documentation, shadowing experienced colleagues, and asking structured questions. Question 18. Describe how you would handle confidential client or transaction information. I would treat client and transaction information on a strict need-to-know basis. That means using approved systems, avoiding downloads or screenshots unless permitted, checking email recipients carefully, and never discussing sensitive details in informal settings. I would also follow clean desk and access control requirements. Confidentiality is not just a policy issue. Mishandling data can harm customers, trigger regulatory problems, and damage trust in the bank. Make sure to cover need-to-know access, data protection, clean desk, secure systems, avoiding informal sharing, email discipline, confidentiality policies, and reputational consequences of mishandling information. Question 19. Give an example of how automation can improve banking operations and what risks it can introduce. Automation can improve operations by removing repetitive manual steps, reducing processing time, and making outcomes more consistent. For example, a workflow tool could validate mandatory fields before a payment request reaches the processor. But automation also introduces risks if rules are poorly designed, source data is wrong, or exceptions are not monitored. I would want strong testing, access controls, fallback procedures, and regular review to make sure automation improves control rather than hiding issues. In your answer, talk about reducing manual effort, improving speed and consistency, using robotics or workflow tools, but also covering data quality, exception handling, access, testing, and oversight. Question 20. Why should we hire you for an HSBC operations role? You should hire me because I bring the mindset operations needs: accuracy, ownership, and calm execution under deadlines. I am comfortable following controls, but I also look for ways to improve inefficient steps. I communicate clearly with stakeholders and escalate early when risk appears. For HSBC, I would bring a customer-focused approach with respect for regulation, confidentiality, and global process discipline. My goal would be to deliver reliable work that teams can trust. Be sure to connect your strengths to the role: attention to detail, control mindset, communication, teamwork, ability to work under deadlines, learning agility, customer focus, and fit with a global bank. If you are still with us, congratulations. You are much ahead of the rest and serious about preparing for your interview. We hope we were able to add value to your preparation and create some helpful content. Do not forget to like and share this video. Your small act can do great things for us.